All right, we have another ghost story from Ypsilanti. This one concerning a house at 302 Oak. Is it Oak Street? I believe it's Oak Street. Yeah, I believe it's 302 Oak Street. Let's see what it says. Let's get the terminology right here. Yeah, it's definitely Oak Street. All right, I came across these three photos in a search for an Ypsilanti ghost stories, and apparently there were two separate families that reported ghost sightings at 302 Oak Street. We will start with the first. This is the earlier story that I found from 1988. Haunted homes. And this delves into several homes in that, not only Ypsilanti, but Ann Arbor, Dixboro, the famous Dixboro one. Haunted homes. What year? What date is this? October 88? October 30th, 1988. Owners get into the spirit of having a ghost in residence. By Constance. Story by Constance Crump. Photo by Colleen Fitzgerald. Eccentric, unusual, marvelous tales of haunted houses in Washtenaw County rival the best of ghostly lore. Haunted houses are both mysterious and romantic. Although the Addams family comes to mind immediately, hauntings are seldom comic, at least to those involved on a first-person basis. None of the tales which follow are scientific by any definition. Neither are they mundane. One of the earliest and best documented Ann Arbor ghosts, Martha Mulholland, hasn't been seen lately, but in 1845 she was the center of attention in Dixboro. Her murder was discovered when she appeared to Isaac Van Wert, a carpenter who rented the house where she had died just weeks before. Mulholland, a widow, was poisoned by her brother-in-law John Mulholland, who hoped to gain control of her real estate holdings. According to Van Wert's sworn statements before William R. Perry, an Ann Arbor justice of the peace, each of the several times he saw the ghost, she told him she had been murdered. His story was convincing enough to cause her body to be exhumed. An autopsy proved that she had indeed been poisoned, although there was insufficient evidence to prosecute her evil brother-in-law and the medicine peddler who supplied the poisonous balm of Gilead, which did Martha in. Mulholland's house, which stood in a field just off Plymouth Road, burned down in the 1860s, according to Dixboro historian Carol Willits Freeman, who treasures a copy of Van Wert's affidavit. Ironically, she points out, when John Mulholland fled after the murder was revealed, he lost all his property. Freeman also recalls another 19th century haunted house in Dixboro, near the corner of Cherry Hill and Plymouth Roads, is a house which was once a tavern. Is that really Cherry Hill and Plymouth? Is that really a Dixboro? Okay, anyway. A peddler who had I think that's, isn't that just Canton? Anyway, a peddler who had taken lodging there disappeared, leaving his horse and wagon. Villagers searched Frane's Lake for his body, but it wasn't found. In the 1960s, Freeman says a Mr. Gibb who lived across the road said that on a clear, cool night he could hear the tinkle of the peddler's wagon bells. Jingling bells have the edge over clinking chains for novelty. Sometimes ghosts seem curiously unoriginal, but it turns out that things that go bump in the night may have an excuse for their banality, if you believe Dr. Carlos Osis, a psychologist with New York's American Society for Psychical Research, which has been collecting reports of psychic phenomena for more than 100 years. Such stylized ghostly behavior may be the only expression possible for some netherland manifestations. Osis told the Old House Journal in a recent article on haunted houses. That's clunky. What did he say? Osis said that some ghosts may be mere fragments of human personality, which exist after death, scraps of energy that hang on, unable to communicate except through knocks or furniture dragging noises. The question Osis says, is there a real human being who died in an unfortunate circumstance and somehow missed the bus and stopped where he or she shouldn't be? They're stuck, like when you take a cheap flight to Spain and can't get back. What do you do? Such was the dilemma of the ghost in the house near Washtenaw Avenue, where Alice Calder of Ypsilanti was a frequent guest in the mid 70s. The house's current occupants, who have seen no signs of ghosts in the 13 years they have lived there, have asked that its location remain anonymous. The house is a beautiful Tudor revival built in the first part of the century. Soon after they moved in, Calder's friends noticed belongings misplaced or moved about the house. Heavy, hard to open leaden glass doors in the living room were never used, yet the owners often found them open. They found out that the house was built by a man with a taste for gambling. Calder relates. He lost all his money and hanged himself from the chandelier in the living room. One evening, when Calder and her friends sat facing the fireplace beneath the chandelier, Calder found herself shivering, although the room was warm. My friend started to laugh, Calder recalls. That's the ghost, she said. He started following me around during the day. You could put your hand out and feel a column of cold air. We could follow it. The house had a large staircase. The ghost would lead up to the bedroom area. At a December dinner party, as guests tipped cocktails in the living room, the dining room table suddenly erupted in flames. All right, Calder says they threw the tablecloth outside, and when they retrieved it, it wasn't even scorched. That's interesting. It was a fascinating house, Calder says with great relish. When your dining room table gets a column of fire on it, you tend to get a little wound up, but it was more nuisance than anything else, nothing really destructive. I was a believer. I had enough physical evidence to believe in their ghost. Judy Dow Alexander, a former resident who sold the house to Calder's friends, says she never saw a ghost while she lived there, although she was entertained by accounts of subsequent encounters. Dow recalls the most famous haunted house in her Ann Arbor childhood was the Hoover Mansion, now the headquarters of General Automotive Corporation. When we were kids, we were petrified of it. Dow says it was empty for about 20 years. We all made up stories. Nobody ever really saw anything, but it piqued the curiosity of every kid in the neighborhood. Talent agent Jim Fleming's curiosity was piqued and more when he moved into an old Italianate. What the hell does that mean? Farmhouse in Grass Lake last year. Fleming has had unusual experiences since childhood. He was born with the placenta over his face, a happening which signals psychic abilities in some cultures. It was about 10 o'clock at night, he remembers. For some reason, I got this urge to go downstairs and read the house history. To do so had never occurred to me before that. When Fleming read that the dining room's floor was Portuguese cork tile, he immediately began removing the room's ugly carpet, a project he had earlier abandoned when he thought he had seen only subflooring under the rug. I started pulling everything away in the dining room, he says. There was beautiful tile underneath. I suddenly got anxious about getting it all done that evening. Finally, I had a huge clump of carpeting and started pushing it out into the hallway through the door. As I was pushing it out, I looked over and saw very briefly, reclining on the couch, this wispy figure. Kind of smiling, she seemed very pleased that I had discovered this tile floor. If anything, my impression was that she was from the 19th century. She was wearing a long, flowing dress, but it was so quick I couldn't tell if she was young or old. I did a double take, and it was gone. Quick impressions are common in ghostly sightings. So is friendliness, contrary to legend. For the most part, ghostly phenomena are relatively benign, says Donna McCormick, Director of Administration for the American Society of Psychical Research. Rarely do we come across cases where people are injured, but people become anxious and afraid when they don't know what's really happening. The ghostly events recorded in the Society's International Log of Psychic Phenomena have other features in common. Sightings are primarily shadowy forms, McCormick says. Often, witnesses will hear a sound like knocking. Most cases are quite mild. It could go on for the whole life of your stay in the house. Benign ghosts are more common than threatening ones because we're dealing with people's impressions, not necessarily with reality, says EMU sociology professor Marcello Truzzi, who researches paranormal happenings. There can be several different reasons for apparitions, says Truzzi. Ghosts may be attached to an individual or attached to a place. In general, benign hauntings are going to make a house more attractive rather than less. There are people who look for haunted houses to buy. And the second page. Many reports, Truzzi says, turn out to be literally incredible. People will not even have a good basis for thinking something unusual happened, he says. Such was not the case for Frank Burgess of 1 Oak Street, Ypsilanti. Is that the Burgess family? I wonder if this is the same house or they're multiple. No, there's 302 Oak Street. All right. 1 Oak Street, Ypsilanti. The Burgess family, whose house was built in 1834. Yeah, I don't read any of this. I like to be surprised myself. Whose house was built in 1834, has been having specific and disconcerting ghostly encounters for years. One night, Burgess was nearly asleep when a nightgown clad figure he assumed was his wife got into bed. When I woke up an hour or so later, recalls, everybody was still in the kitchen, shooting the breeze. I said to my wife, I thought you came up to bed. She answered, I never left the kitchen. Another time, a visiting relative was asleep in a downstairs bedroom when she was awakened by a dog licking her face. A young girl, about 18 or 19 years old, in a long gown, was holding the dog, but both faded away from the relative when the relative attempted to strike up a conversation. Lights switching on and off at random and scary midnight apparitions have been more signs of otherworldly spirits in the Burgess house, which was once owned by a former Washtenaw County surveyor named Pettibone. Pettibone himself supposedly haunted the old county courthouse in the 19th century. Just down the street from the Burgess house, Jennifer Schwarzenberger, 16, encountered a friendly spirit just 4 months ago. The Schwarzenberger family moved into the elegant Italianate, maybe that's Italianate, just say Italian house, at 302 Oak Street 3 years ago. The house, built in 1857 or 1858, has a ghostly past that was unknown to the Schwarzenbergers until mysterious things began happening to Jennifer. The previous owners didn't even tell us about their experiences, says Jennifer's mother, Susan Schwarzenberger. Jennifer has an exclusive on the go so far, unless you count the family dogs, who sometimes bark unprovoked at the parlor fireplace or seem to watch things unseen climb the stairs. One evening, as Jennifer went up to bed, she said good night to her parents in the family room on the main floor. A male voice said, "Good night, Jennifer," very clearly from the fireplace, she relates. The voice sounded middle-aged, lower and more gravely than my dad's voice, and my dad has a deep voice. Thus did Wally, as the ghost is now known, hail Jennifer. May all your Twilight Zone encounters be as gracious. And I guess that's the end of it. That's an odd ending. There's Dear Abby. I think that's the end of this. It just abruptly ends with that. Okay, let's check the next page and see if there's anything else. No internet. Well, there we go. That signals the end better than anything, doesn't it? Goodbye.